From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Wednesday, April 9th, and here are today's headlines. When the Trump administration warned schools that they could lose federal funds if they didn't promise to get rid of certain diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, Vermont Education Secretary Zoe Saunders initially told superintendents on Friday to comply. Saunders has since reversed course after widespread pushback from Vermont educators, including Winooski Superintendent Wilmer Chavarria. The leader of the state's most diverse school district said signing the certification letter was both morally wrong and a strategic error.
We will not save our money just because we do that. We will not save our funding just because we continue to capitulate. They're not just going to leave us alone just because we raised our white flag. It's not going to end there.
Saunders retracted her guidance Monday evening. Planned Parenthood of Northern New England announced yesterday it will be closing its St. Johnsbury Health Center in June. The facility is currently open just 2 days a week. Staffing challenges, low patient volume, the high cost of healthcare delivery, and recent flooding have made operating the healthcare center financially unsustainable. Jessica Barquist is a spokesperson for the sexual and reproductive health provider.
That building has flooded 3 times in the last year and just needs some costly maintenance and upgrades that, given our overall deficit budget, we weren't able to do in the future.
Planned Parenthood of Northern New England says it's currently working with the 700 or so patients to find alternative healthcare options. Following a failed last-minute bid to recruit more students, the elementary school in Ripton will be closed next year. The school board for the Addison Central School District voted to send those students to Salisbury instead, about 15 minutes away. Parents have fought for years to keep Ripton open. Steve Cash represents Ripton on the school board, which made the call last week.
If I had 2 parts, a head and a heart, this is a decision from the head.
The school board stopped short of making a decision about the school beyond next year. The Trump administration cut off all the federal support to humanity councils across the country last week. Vermont Humanities Director Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup says the federal funding makes up almost half his budget, and he will have to reduce programming.
I can't predict at this point, 2 days out, what that might look like, but that is a significant cut, and so we will have to do less.
Vermont Humanities supports literacy programs and public discussions at libraries and museums across the state. The funding cuts came after about 80% of the staff at the National Endowment for the Humanities were laid off by the Department of Government Efficiency. And the deadline to get a Real ID compliant identification is now less than 1 month away. Beginning May 7th, people looking to travel from a U.S. airport with only a driver's license as identification will need it to be Real ID compliant with a star in the upper right-hand corner. WCAX reports that nearly 41,000 valid Vermont driver's licenses do not have Real ID yet. Coming up, the head of the nonprofit Local Motion discusses the bicycling infrastructure in Vermont's largest city and how they're trying to get more people to use bikes for daily commuting. That's after this. Bike advocates in Vermont's biggest city want to increase the percentage of people who bike to work. Currently, about 5% of Burlington residents bike commute. That's the highest percentage in the state. Jonathan Weber is the program director at the nonprofit Local Motion. They work to increase the safety, accessibility, and enjoyment of biking in Vermont. Weber joined Vermont Edition yesterday to discuss the current state of Chittenden County's bike infrastructure.
We are definitely in the youth of our bike network development life cycle. What that means practically for people who are trying to bike commute is that we have a pretty disconnected network of bike infrastructure. And so it doesn't feel very safe for most people who want to get from A to B to do so on their bike. It's hard to figure out what routes to take because it's not obvious when you're out on the street. You don't just say, oh, there's a bike lane, there's a bike path, I can take that. You have to look at a map and try and figure it out, which adds another barrier.
You said youth, but it's not like it's a baby. Maybe we're talking like kid or preteen. I mean, we have this amazing bike path all along the lake and the causeway.
Definitely not a baby. Maybe advancing towards our teenage years. One thing that you have to understand is that when you're trying to build a network, there's a big difference between a completed network and a network that's even 90% completed, right? Because people need to know that they can get from A to B on a really safe and connected route the whole way. And, if there's one intersection along the way that makes them feel like they're putting their life at risk, they're unlikely to give it a try.
So even if it's just that 1% of their route that feels dangerous, that's enough to have somebody say, I'm not going to take this at all.
For a lot of people.
Yeah.
There are people in the population like myself who are maybe more confident on a bike, and they're willing to deal with those sketchier feeling pieces of infrastructure. But for those of us who want to see more people out on bikes, the majority of the population is really sensitive to dangerous situations when they're out on a bike.
So is there a plan that the local motion or the city or developers are following to try to increase bike infrastructure in the Burlington region? Is there a roadmap?
There are so many roadmaps.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, and planning is sort of this like nesting doll phenomenon that we have.
Okay.
And so, at the county level, we have the Chittenden County Active Transportation Plan, which lays out sort of at a high level where we as a county want to have our most comfortable, most important biking routes. And then we have plans at the municipal level. So Burlington has its own walk bike master plan that they're actually updating right now. South Burlington just finished an active transportation plan. And so you wind up with a lot of plans. Some of them move forward, some of them don't. And what's going on with federal funding right now is sort of another element in the mix, because most of those plans are written with the expectation that we're going to get federal funding to accomplish these projects.
Federal funding from what bucket or what agency?
So here in Vermont, and the way that it works in the U.S. is that, the federal government sends federal transportation dollars to the states, and then the states allocate that to state projects and to local projects. And so specifically here in Vermont, we have two grant programs, the Bike and Pedestrian Grant Program and the Transportation Alternatives Program, which fund bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And then there are also, projects that happen just as a part of larger state construction projects. So they might add shoulders to a roadway, they might add a path along a roadway, and that's just coming out of sort of the transportation block grant usually that we get as a state.
Local Motion is a statewide organization, and they offer assistance to communities outside of Chittenden County that want to better their bike infrastructure. Are you working with any communities right now to do just that?
We have over 20 active walk bike groups in most of the larger cities and towns throughout Vermont. And so we provide regular assistance to those groups to help them understand, how to navigate the planning process and how to navigate this rather complex way we've set up of building infrastructure here in the U.S.
One question I have about that is how exactly you go about addressing community demand when demand might be low at the onset outside of a group of like bike advocates, for example, because there is no bike infrastructure. And it's hard for people to imagine what it could be like to bike to work if they currently live in a place where there's no bike lanes. And the thought of getting on your bike to get your job or school is just kind of crazy.
Yeah, the incredible thing is, even since I started at Local Motion, I've seen a really big shift in how people think about bike infrastructure and even how people think about the built environment. Things I think are really changing, and people recognize that they want to have a nice place to live. And part of that is being able to walk comfortably, being able to bike comfortably. There is a lot of demand for this kind of thing, even in places where there isn't infrastructure to begin with. So that's part of it. The other part is that there's a lot of infrastructure that we can build at a pretty low cost by repurposing extra space that's already on our streets. And so what that looks like usually is narrowing a travel lane to stripe a bike lane, or maybe on a street where there's parking on both sides of the street, consolidating that parking onto one side so you can have bike lanes. And that's just paint for the most part. So it's a very inexpensive way to do it. And you can start to build more ridership in a community that way through those less expensive projects.
And Jonathan, you are on the Burlington Walk Bike Council. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is and maybe one project they're working on that you're excited or hopeful about?
Yeah, so the Burlington Walk Bike Council is an advisory council to Burlington's Department of Public Works. And Burlington, of the places in Vermont, is probably the closest to a good connected bike network. And I will say that that is showing up in the number of people that ride in Burlington. So just when we look at the commute to work mode share, which is obviously only a slice of the people that bike, Burlington is around 5%, which is about 5 times higher than the rest of the state on average. And that's actually doubled since 2010. So you can see the work that Burlington's doing to build out this infrastructure actually having the intended result.
Listen to Vermont Edition's full conversation about bike commuting on the Vermont Edition podcast feed or at vermontpublic.org. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Lola Dufour, Elodie Reed, Sabine Pooks, Howard Weiss-Tisman, and Nathaniel Wilson. Today's episode was edited by Liam Elder Connors, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Talk to you tomorrow.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.